When Apple decides something, it can impact entire global supply chains. And right now, Apple is moving production out of China and into India. That alone has sparked a huge claim that India is becoming the next factory of the world. But here's the problem. China didn't become the world's factory because it was cheap. It became the world's factory because it built something that no one else has ever replicated. So before we talk about India replacing China, we need to rewind and understand what China actually built. China strategically planned its manufacturing dominance. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, China made a really deliberate trade with the world: cheap labor and political stability in exchange for foreign capital, technology, and jobs. Cheap labor wasn't the secret. I mean, plenty of countries had cheap labor. What China built instead was industrial density. Entire cities were designed around single industries. One cluster made phone screens, another made batteries, another made chips, casings, cables, screws, packaging, everything. If a factory needed a new supplier, it often wasn't like across the ocean, it was across the street. And the Chinese state played a massive role. It built ports before demand even existed, highways before traffic arrived, power plants before factories ramped up, worker housing next to industrial parks. By the time Apple launched its iPhone in 2007, China had something that no other country had: instant scale. If Apple needed millions of phones assembled in weeks, China could do it. If Apple needed design changes overnight, China could absorb them. And if Apple needed hundreds of thousands of workers for a peak season, China could mobilize them. That capability became self-reinforcing. The more companies came, the stronger the ecosystem got, and the stronger it got, the harder it became to leave. But if China worked so well, why did Apple even consider moving production? Well, because the world's changed. First, China got more expensive. Factory wages rose. China became a middle-income country with a highly skilled workforce. Then, geopolitics entered the picture. The US-China trade war introduced tariffs and uncertainty. COVID exposed the danger of putting too much production in just one place. And tensions around Taiwan added long-term risk that corporate boards just could not ignore. Apple didn't want to abandon China. Apple wanted insurance. And that strategy has a name: China plus one. And the plus one became India. India checks a lot of boxes. It's a population of over 1.4 billion people, a young workforce, lower wages than China, and geopolitically, it's even seen as a friendly alternative by the US and Europe. India's government knew this moment mattered. Prime Minister Narendra Modi personally pushed manufacturing as central to India's rise. His government rolled out production-linked incentives like tax breaks and subsidies tied directly to output. This wasn't a passive policy, this was a pitch, and Apple responded. Today, roughly 15 to 20% of iPhones are assembled in India. Major suppliers expanded operations, hiring tens of thousands of workers and building massive campuses. When Apple opened its first official retail stores in India in 2023, it wasn't just symbolic. A store signals confidence in that market, and manufacturing signals commitment to that market. So on headlines alone, it looks like history is repeating itself, but here's where the nuance matters. When people hear Apple is moving production to India, they imagine entire supply chains relocating. But that's not what's happening. Most iPhones that are assembled in India still rely heavily on Chinese-made components: screens, camera modules, batteries, chips, and precision parts. Those parts are often made in China and shipped to India and assembled there. And see, assembly is labor-intensive, but it's not where most of the value is. The real leverage sits upstream: components, tooling, chemical processing, logistics, and engineering. And China spent decades building that upstream dominance. India is just starting. Now, Apple isn't the first company to test life outside China. Samsung started pulling smartphone production out of China years earlier. In fact, by 2019, Samsung shut down its last phone factory in China entirely. Instead, it ramped production up in Vietnam and India. But here's the crucial difference. Samsung controls much more of its own supply chain. Like screens, memory, chips, Samsung makes them in-house. Apple does not. Apple relies on thousands of external suppliers, most of which are still deeply embedded in China. And that makes Apple's move slower, messier, and far more revealing. Samsung proved it was possible. Apple is showing how hard it really is. Here's the uncomfortable truth. China doesn't just manufacture a lot, it manufactures at a scale that no one else comes close to. China produces more manufactured goods than the US, Germany, Japan, South Korea, and India combined. Entire provinces specializing in single industries. India's manufacturing base is improving, but it's fragmented. Infrastructure quality varies by state. Ports are better, but logistics bottlenecks remain, and power reliability can still be inconsistent. China built redundancy, so if one supplier fails, another can step in immediately. That depth doesn't yet exist in India, because scale is not about volume, it's about resilience. So another misconception is that cheaper labor automatically wins. But manufacturing at this level is not just about wages, it's about skills, repetition, and experience. Millions of workers in China spent decades on factory floors. Engineers, line managers, and technicians have built an incredibly deep talent pool by doing the same complex tasks at massive scale year after year. This gap became obvious when Apple explored manufacturing iPhones in the US. See, the problem was not cost, it was a capability. Apple found it could hire assembly workers, but struggled to find enough tooling engineers and specialized technicians to run high-volume electronics production. In China, those people can be mobilized by the tens of thousands, and in the US, they just don't exist. India is now building that muscle, but that training takes time. High-volume electronics manufacturing is not very forgiving. I mean, when you're making millions of units, tiny mistakes compound fast. Early production runs in India have faced yield and quality challenges, and those are the same growing pains that China worked through years ago. As some low-margin assembly work began drifting outward, China did not panic. President Xi Jinping doubled down on moving up the value chain. So think like electric vehicles, advanced batteries, robotics, industrial automation, clean energy manufacturing. So instead of competing on cheap labor, China started competing on system-level dominance. And that's why China didn't just become the world's largest EV producer, which I made a whole other video about. It became the dominant battery maker, the dominant lithium refiner, and the dominant exporter of clean energy hardware. So China didn't lose manufacturing, it's just evolving. Okay, we need to talk about Trump versus Apple because this moment really matters. So in 2019, President Trump publicly demanded that Apple build iPhones in the US. He said, "Make them here." Apple's response was polite, but revealing. The CEO, Tim Cook, explained that the issue here wasn't wages, it was capability. See, in China, Apple could find tens of thousands of tooling engineers almost overnight, but in the US, Cook said, "You'll struggle to fill a room." And that moment exposed a hard truth. Manufacturing isn't just about patriotism or paychecks, it's about entire ecosystems. And while Trump wanted reshoring, Apple needed industrial depth. So these two things weren't aligned. So is India the next China? Not really. India isn't replacing China, it's absorbing overflow. Global companies no longer want all their eggs in one basket, and India offers diversification, resilience, and long-term potential. China, meanwhile, remains irreplaceable for scale, complexity, and speed. This is not a zero-sum battle, it's a rebalancing of risk. So what we're watching here isn't the sudden fall of China or even the rise of India. What we're watching is the end of an era where one country could dominate global manufacturing alone. The future looks more distributed, more regional, more political. China will remain the most powerful manufacturing hub on Earth probably for decades. And India will become a major pillar, but not a replacement. And Apple will keep doing what it's always been doing, quietly reshaping global supply chains in ways that only become obvious years later. So when you hear India is the next factory of the world, pause, because it's not that simple. I want to know what you think in the comments below. While you're at it, make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you don't miss the next one.